1921, President Harding, who was, as we know, but he was like, he was predictable, uninspired, uninspiring. From Ohio, he followed the wave of opinion. So he didn't really do anything to separate himself as an active or progressive or do anything type of president for that matter. So somebody said to Harding, look, read this, do this, pay attention to this, and please let us know what you think we should do or what your opinions are on the economy and some of the problems that might be happening soon. And he said, you know what, look, even if there was a book somewhere that told me exactly what the economy was about or how to deal with the problems, I probably wouldn't understand it anyway. So maybe someone can help me out. So he really wasn't that aware, or he didn't have any opinions on how to deal with the economy. Warren G. Harding supported the Fordney-McCumber Tariff. The Fordney-McCumber Tariff of 1922. Traditional Republican high tariff policy was reinstated during Harding's administration. High tariff Republican ideology is reinstated during his presidency in 1922. It's called the Fordney-McCumber Tariff. Under this legislation, custom duties were increased in some cases to the highest levels ever in U.S. history. It introduced an innovation in American tariff policy and one of the interesting things about this Fordney-McCumber tariff was that it empowered the president to increase or decrease custom duties to prevent unfair practices in the import trade, to retaliate against trade discrimination by foreign countries. So I guess the president had more power than usual from this point on in terms of adjusting, tweaking the tariff rate. Now, one of the positive things we could say about Harding and his presidency was his pick of Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes. Charles Evans Hughes. Just like it sounds. Secretary of State. A man of vision, a prominent attorney, and an internationalist. So you would say he's the salmon during the 1920s, swimming upstream against the currents of isolationism. He believed delete. He believed the problems left over from World War I could not be ignored. So in 1921, he calls for what becomes known as the Washington Arms Conference, or the Washington Conference. 1921. The conference would become the landmark moment of Harding's presidency. If you took the regular U.S. history class instead of this class, one of the key things you would learn about, and they would spend plenty of time on, is the Washington Conference of 1921, the Harding presidency. Because it embodied the idea of collective security, or at least working together in a global community and looking to prevent another conflagration between the Western Hemisphere and the rest of the world. You know, this big world war that happened. So, what was the Washington Conference? Anybody here have a background or familiar with the Washington Conference? Anyone? Logan? Logan Richard? Okay, so imperialism. I think imperialism is a component of what you're trying to say. Arms race, people building more and more stuff, and eventually at some point, secret alliances, and there were a few other things. So they looked at the arms race as one of the big things. Actually, if you don't have something to use, the likelihood of war is less likely. So, okay. So, the Washington Conference called together a lot of the significant powers of the day. All right, the significant powers of the day. Give me a handful of them. Go ahead. United States. France. Britain.
Cuba. Russia.
No, Germany is not there. Why is Germany not there? They've been disarmed. Shh.
How about France?
France, United States, Italy, Japan, and why not Russia? Okay, so Harding dies, and after he dies, a series of scandals come out that would, taint his legacy. The most famous of which is the Teapot Dome scandal. The Teapot Dome scandal would implicate a number of Harding's political friends and appointments. Teapot Dome scandal was similar to the Ballinger-Pinchot affair of Howard Taft. If you remember, a federal agent, federal employee, illegally leasing to a private company natural reserves, whether it's oil, coal, or what have you, areas that have been designated as, reserves in case of time of war or whatever, for whatever reason. And so you got this private company that's making money off it. I'm sure there's some kickbacks to some politicians, and this was all exposed after Harding's death. Harding, when he was alive, said once, "It's not your enemies you need to worry about, it's your friends. It's your goddamn friends." End quote. That would resonate with Presidents Grant. And meanwhile, America was changing dramatically. Ethnic diversity was becoming apparent during the 1920s. We're not so Anglo-Saxon Protestant anymore in terms of the absolute majority. And a lot of this was happening in the cities, as you can imagine. The transformation of America into an ethnically and religiously diverse nation would cause a backlash in the 1920s. Laws in the 1920s, such as the 1921 and 1924 immigration laws, would ban immigration from certain countries, especially Asia. Prohibition now. Prohibition was also going on at this time period. Not only anti-Asian immigration legislation, Prasad, but the Prohibition movement was in full swing. The 18th Amendment was the culmination of a long campaign against alcohol production and consumption in America. We know now that it proved to be a terrible disappointment in practice. That might have had to do with the fact that the group in charge of enforcing Prohibition was what arm of the government was responsible for enforcing Prohibition? The Treasury Department. Anyway, but we need to be familiar with Prohibition. The social cost. The social cost of alcohol use in America, it was very high in the early 20th century. Times when wages were low, most of the working class families, to have the man of the family drinking heavily was catastrophic. First of all, it could make him far more vulnerable to industrial accidents, and if you lost your arm or if you were injured severely in a factory, there weren't the unemployment benefits that we're familiar with today. Also, a drunken father, because of stress from a lack of money, was much more likely to commit acts of domestic violence, which the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which would turn this into a political campaign to bring Prohibition to reality and to make the 18th Amendment part of our country's Constitution. The WCTU had emphasized the transformation of individuals. It was the moral improvement they were looking at that would result from Prohibition. The Anti-Saloon League agreed. However, they were much more legislation-oriented, and they would press for the Constitutional Amendment as early as 1913 to make Prohibition a reality. So you have the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and you have the Anti-Saloon League, pressing heavily for the abolition of alcohol and the manufacturing, transportation, and selling of alcohol. Before you leave, the First World War, why did that provide the perfect environment, the perfect atmosphere for passing the Prohibition Amendment? Not necessarily buying from Germany, but German-American beer manufacturers, alcohol manufacturers who lived in America sold a lot of the alcohol to Americans. Whether it was Budweiser, Pabst Blue Ribbon, no, there's more. Busch, there's a bunch. Anheuser-Busch. A lot of the beer producers in America in the 1920s were German-American producers.